Weston and I were childhood sweethearts, and we got engaged before he enlisted in the military. Later, Weston used his connection with his superior's daughter to advance in social standing, forcing me to end the engagement voluntarily. Indy's family plotted against me to ruin my reputation and made my grandmother so angry that she died in despair. Overcome with sorrow, I threw myself into the river and ended my life. But when I opened my eyes, I found myself back in the past, on the day I was coerced into breaking off the engagement. This time I vowed to make Weston kneel and beg me to break up with him. May, are you listening? Indy's dissatisfied voice snapped me back to reality. I stared at her in a daze. Had God truly heard my prayer? Was I really reborn? Indy kept speaking, trying to comfort me. She said, May, my brother only sees you as a sibling. We were all too hasty back then. Even if you break the engagement, we can still be close in the future. When my brother is promoted, he will surely treat you well. Coming to my senses, I smirked inwardly at how shameless they were. We had been engaged for years, but now, after his rise in social status, it was suddenly brotherly affection. In my past life, I hadn't seen through their schemes, but now it was only thanks to my self-control that I hadn't taken drastic actions against her entire family. With an effort to conceal my emotions, I pushed Indy's hand away and impatiently walked out. Bring the engagement tokens to the brigade headquarters tomorrow, and we'll have the village chief witness it, I said. When I returned home and saw my grandmother, busy under the dim kerosene lamp, I felt a sense of reassurance. I rushed to her, holding the frail old woman tightly. The scent of comfort filled the air. In my past life, I had been so devastated by the engagement breakup that my grandmother's hair turned white overnight. When my reputation was ruined by their scheme, my grandmother's fury caused her to spit blood, and by the time I arrived home, she had already passed away. The chill of her death was as cold as when I had lain at the bottom of the river, but now the person I was holding was warm, her blood still flowing. It felt so good. The next day, I rose early and went alone to the brigade headquarters. Indy's family was already there, likely hoping to avoid being surrounded by too many people. When the village chief noticed we had all arrived, he took a few deep puffs from his cigarette and asked, May, Indy said you agreed to end the engagement yesterday. I glanced at Indy and her mother, who looked uneasy. Slowly, I spoke. Village chief, I agree to end the engagement, but I have one condition. Indy's mother grabbed my hand, feigning tears. After all these years, I've treated you like my own daughter. It's a shame we didn't develop a mother-daughter bond. But tell me what you want, and I'll grant it. I smiled and returned her hand, then dropped the bombshell. I want Weston to kneel and beg me to break up with him. Indy and her mother screamed in unison, Impossible! Indy's mother snatched her hand away and pointed at my forehead. You heartless girl, my son is an officer now. Why should he kneel to you? Who do you think you are? Indy stared at me as though she had been deceived. Her eyes reddened. May, that's not what you said yesterday. Don't try to act pitiful in front of me. I'm not falling for your act anymore. I turned to the village chief, who was surrounded by smoke. "Village chief, do you think my request is unreasonable?" The village chief continued smoking in silence. I continued, "Indy, don't blame me for being ruthless. Your family has never acted decently. All these years, I've bought you many things, and my grandmother has made you delicious dishes and treats. Where is your conscience? Your whole family has used me from the start, and you think I didn't notice? I may not have realized it before, but I understand now." After scolding Indy, I looked at her mother. "Auntie, when my parents were alive, you looked down on me. After they passed, Indy befriended me, but I know you were only interested in the compensation." Indy's mother turned green, then pale, and I was sure Weston's motives were no purer. "I may be an orphan, but don't think you can bully me," I added, rubbing my forehead where Indy's mother had pointed. It was sore from her forceful gesture. The village chief silently puffed on his cigarette for a while before speaking again. "May, Weston is far from here. How could he come back to Neil?" I slowly responded, "Then let him write a letter of engagement termination and send it to us. Once we receive it, we'll return the tokens, and from then on, we'll have no further ties." Before Indy or her mother could protest, the village chief decisively concluded, "That's the way it will be. Indy, write to your brother and ask him to handle it quickly." I thanked the village chief and was about to head home when Indy stopped me. "What is it?" I frowned, noticing the fresh palm print on her right cheek. I didn't need to ask to know it was from her mother. Indy then asked, "Does the hairpin you promised to buy me still count?" I stared at her for a moment, unsure of how to respond. In my past life, I treated her as a good friend, but she saw me as a fool. As long as she pretended to be pitiful, she took everything from me. I sneered and said, "It doesn't count at all. The things I bought for you before, including those you took from my house, add up to about 100 wen. Pay me back." Indy looked at me in disbelief. "I don't have money." "If you don't have money, there are other ways," I replied, grabbing Indy and dragging her to her house. Her mother wasn't home. Inside, I rummaged through their belongings, taking hairpins, hair ropes, powdered milk, dresses, and small leather shoes without hesitation. As I walked to the door, I noticed 2 high school textbooks in a cabinet beside the bed, and I took those as well. Since I had been given another chance at life, I vowed to take a different path. I would take the college entrance exam and change my future. In my past life, I had been too depressed by the breakup to think about my future, but now I was determined to succeed. I would pass the entrance exam, leave this small village, and take my grandmother to experience the world, letting her enjoy the happiness of having descendants around her. Not long after I returned home, Indy's mother showed up with others and began screaming in our yard, accusing me of robbing from Indy. If I hadn't come back and noticed, our Indy would have been too scared to speak up. Her voice grew louder as she demanded the return of the items I supposedly stole. The neighbors gathered around, and I calmly responded, "Those things were either bought by me or given to me. If I choose not to return them, What's the problem? Indy's mother, having found a supposed loophole, stood up and pointed at me, shouting, "Since you gave them to her, they belong to Indy. You can't take them back." The neighbors chimed in, agreeing with her, but I held my ground, pointing out the real situation. Before things escalated further, Grandma suddenly yelled, "Go inside and shut the door." I quickly ran into the house, just as Grandma poured a bucket of foul-smelling liquid onto Indy's mother. The smell was unbearable, causing everyone to vomit, and Indy's mother rushed home, still screaming. I looked around our yard with a bitter expression. How could we clean up such a mess? A few days later, while I was cooking, Godan ran in breathlessly. "Sister May, Grandma and Indy are fighting in the field." I froze for a moment, then handed Godan some candy. "You're so helpful, Godan. If anything happens to my family, come tell me, and I'll reward you with candy." I quickly grabbed the urine bucket and rushed to the field where a crowd had gathered. I shouted, "Move aside. All of you, move aside, or I won't be responsible if you get caught in the middle." The onlookers saw the bucket I was carrying and quickly made way, though they didn't stray too far to miss the drama. I took advantage of the gap in the crowd and stormed into the circle. Winking at Grandma, I signaled her to move aside. Then I poured the contents of the bucket. Again, there were sounds of people vomiting. The smell was still overwhelming, though not as powerful as the previous time. Indy's mother rose to her feet, her face as pale as a ghost and as fierce as a demon, charging towards me. Twice in a week, being drenched in filth. Who could endure that? I pushed Grandma aside, and as the crowd scattered, I turned and quickly ran towards the river to wash off the stench. When I reached a slippery spot by the riverbank, I braced myself and swerved to the side, narrowly avoiding an attack from Indy's mother. In that moment, she lost her balance and fell into the river. The onlookers followed us, and I noticed Indy, who seemed to want to speak, but hesitated, so I ignored her. After Indy's mother was fished out of the water, she was surprisingly unharmed, as the river wasn't too cold. However, she was still eager to lash out, so I took a step forward and glared at her. "Do you still want to experience the taste of filth?" I asked. Indy's mother immediately froze, unwilling to move. I covered my nose and stepped back, as the area still reeked of the mess. At that moment, the postman arrived, riding his bicycle and ringing his bell. "Indy, Indy, there's a letter for you." Indy rushed over, eagerly grabbing the letter, and after reading it, her eyes sparkled. I suspected it was a response from Weston, and I knew trouble was on the way. As expected, the next day, Indy's mother came to our door, all business. "My son said that the Army's discipline is strict, and he can't write the letter to annul the engagement, so you have to write it yourself." She wasted no time and pulled out a handful of melon seeds, cracking them as she spoke. I just laughed inwardly. It was exactly what I had expected. "Well, if your son can't write it, neither can I," said, grabbing the melon seeds from her hand. "It's him trying to climb the social ladder, aiming to marry into a wealthy family, not me. I have all the time in the world, and I'm not afraid to wait." Indy's mother stared at me in shock, as if she couldn't comprehend where the shy, obedient May had gone. The change in me was clear, but she seemed unable to process it. I didn't bother to guess what was going through her mind. After a while, Indy's mother recovered and once again put on a hostile expression. Don't think you can just refuse to write the letter and still cling to my son, draining him dry. Is this your plan, May? Let me tell you, you have to write this annulment letter. It's not up to you. If you comply, we won't hold it against you. But if you keep trying to latch onto my son, you'll regret it. No one will want you, not even if we sold you to an old widower. I slapped her hard across the right cheek, then the left, in perfect symmetry. Afterward, I walked straight toward the bathroom. Indy's mother, seething with rage, seemed about to throw a fit, but when she saw where I was headed, she turned and fled. "You little brat!" she shouted. Grandma came out of the kitchen, touched my head, and smiled proudly. My dear granddaughter has grown up. Even if I'm not around in the future, I'll leave in peace. My voice caught in my throat. Grandma, didn't we agree? I'm preparing for the college entrance exam now. Once I take it, we'll leave this place and go somewhere much bigger and more prosperous. I'll find a job and make money, and you can live a peaceful life with me. Grandma nodded, tears in her eyes. I buried my face in her shoulder, letting my tears soak her clothes. Just as I was about to leave to find the village chief, Godon ran over, looking like he had something important to share. I handed him some candies from my pocket and wiped his nose, grimacing at his dirty face. Godon, you're such a good boy, I said. If anything happens in the future, come to me and I'll give you more candy. Godon put the candy away and began chattering. When Tayu and I were playing hide and seek by the haystack, we overheard Indy's grandmother talking about you with someone else. She said you'd be going there tonight to catch you in the act and teach you a lesson. Godon looked embarrassed. I couldn't tell who the man was. Maybe he's not from our village. I knelt down and gently touched his head. Keep this to yourself for now, okay? Don't tell anyone. After Godon left, I thought to myself, it's finally happening. This is the turning point that led to Grandma's death in my past life. Indy had come to me, claiming to have something urgent to say, but when I went to meet her, she was nowhere to be found. After waiting for a while, just as I was about to leave, I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my neck and passed out. When I regained consciousness, I found myself surrounded by villagers, my clothes disheveled, and an unfamiliar thug standing next to me. I felt dizzy and couldn't hear the conversation around me, but the looks on their faces told me everything I needed to know. I stumbled home, only to find Grandma's lifeless body in a pool of cold, bright red blood. The neighbor aunt explained that Grandma had heard what happened and, in her worry, had collapsed and died. I wanted to throw myself against the wall in despair, holding Grandma's cold body, but I couldn't. After my parents died, Grandma had refused to go live with my aunt, choosing to stay with me because she knew I had no one else. I had to let Grandma go peacefully and with dignity. After the funeral, I was lost in confusion, unable to understand why so much hatred was directed at me. It wasn't until Indy's mother delivered a letter from Weston officially annulling our engagement that I understood. After joining the army, Weston had worked tirelessly for several years, eventually becoming an officer. He had tried every method to get me to end the engagement, but the Army's rules prevented him from simply abandoning me. However, by making it look like I had been unfaithful, he could sever the ties without consequence. Later that evening, Indy came to me, looking nervous and hesitant. She finally spoke, her voice trembling. "May, are you really going to be this cruel to me?" In that moment, she looked like a fragile porcelain doll. For a moment, I almost softened and thought about asking her to go home and stop bothering me. But then she continued, stabbing at my heart. "May, can we go for a walk? There are misunderstandings between us." I agreed, and Indy led me to a small wooden cabin near the base of the mountain, a place few people visited. When we were close, Indy suddenly exclaimed, "May, I have a stomach ache. Wait for me in the cabin. I'll be back in a while." I frowned, feigning concern. "Is it serious? Let me accompany you to the doctor." She quickly refused, insisting, "No, just wait for me in the cabin. I'll go home and come back after using the toilet." Once she left, I picked up a stone and threw it at her. Relieved there was no bleeding, I dragged her into the cabin, then hid behind the haystack, waiting for someone to come. After some time, the same thug from my past life appeared. I closed my eyes and waited. About an hour later, Indy's mother arrived with several others carrying hoses. They quietly approached the cabin, but as soon as they entered, Indy's mother screamed, and various ambiguous sounds mixed with Indy's cries. Indy's mother, upon realizing what had happened, sprang up, shouting at the onlookers to leave. "If you keep looking, I'll gouge your eyes out and feed them to the chickens. I'll cut off your thing if you keep staring." Amid the chaos, I slipped away and went home. From that moment, my life took a new direction. The next morning, Indy's mother stormed into my house, furious. "You little witch. It was you who hurt my Indy, wasn't it? She treated you like a sister, and yet you did this to her. I should have drowned you in your toilet a few days ago." I glanced at Grandma, who had already woken up. I motioned for her to stay lying down. After quickly putting on my shoes, I rushed outside and immediately began slapping Indy's mother, making her cheeks swell with redness. "You damn old woman, don't act like you're in charge around here. Keep spewing your filth, and I'll slap you every time," I warned her. Perhaps because of my fiery demeanor, Indy's mother stood stunned for a long time, unable to speak. When she finally regained herself, she cursed and lunged at me. "You little gold digger who killed your own parents. How dare you try to teach me a lesson? I'll show you who's in charge." She didn't aim for my body, instead repeatedly punching my chest and scratching my face. Seizing the moment, I rushed into the inner room, grabbed the chamber pot, and poured it out for the third time. Indy's mother went berserk. At that moment, several people rushed in from outside, holding their noses as they pulled her away. The village chief entered, looking stern. Your two families have been causing trouble nonstop. Let's put an end to this. I rolled my eyes and replied, Village chief, do you really think I'm the one starting the trouble? When have I ever been the one to provoke things? Every time I'm the victim. Do you really think a poor orphan girl like me is so easy to bully? The onlookers looked uncomfortable, and the village chief, clearing his throat, turned to Indy's mother. Weston's mother, stop making trouble. If you have something to say, just say it. We'll try to resolve it, but if it can't be, I'll do my best to find a way. Indy's mother, now seething, glared at me. May, was it you who lured my Indy into the trap last night? Getting her bullied? I'm going to call the police. I want these two dogs thrown in jail. She screamed, wailing. Daughter, what happened to Indy? Didn't she go home to use the bathroom last night because of a stomach ache? I looked at the village chief with confusion, but his reaction seemed surprised, his face turning a mix of black and red. He stammered for a long time, unable to respond. People around us, unable to hold back any longer, spoke up bluntly. You didn't go out, so, of course, you wouldn't know. Indy's daughter was caught having an affair with someone else last night. Her own mother caught her. Ha ha. Don't you think that's funny? She even took people to strip her daughter and then turned around to cause trouble with May. The murmurs around us grew louder. Indy's mother looked as if she might explode with rage. The village chief quickly motioned for the people around to restrain her and turned to me. May, what were you doing last night? Do you have any witnesses? I shrugged and replied, Godan is the witness. Last night, Indy came to me, saying there were misunderstandings between us and that we needed to talk things through. We went to a small wooden cabin at the foot of the mountain, but before we arrived, Indy said she had a stomach ache and asked to go home to use the toilet, leaving me to wait in the cabin. After waiting for a while and she didn't return, I decided to go home. On my way, I saw Godan running out screaming. I looked at the village chief innocently. If you don't believe me, you can ask Godan at home. The village chief gave a forced smile. May is correct. Last night, I slapped Godan twice for being disobedient, and after that, he ran out. I smiled but didn't say more and took a step back, standing quietly. Indy's mother, however, was unconvinced. She broke free from the people holding her and spat at me in disgust. She's just making things up. Village chief, do you believe this? These two dogs were the ones having an affair in the wild. Indy discovered them and then they framed her. This is just outrageous. Indy's mother went on angrily. Fine, then let's call the police. I interrupted her sharply, speaking slowly and clearly. If you think I colluded with someone to frame Indy, then let's call the police and let them find the evidence. Do you dare? When the police come, the questioning won't be as easy as our chat here. They will interrogate us one by one at the police station. I'm not afraid of ghosts knocking on my door, especially since I haven't done anything wrong. I just don't know about other people. Indy's mother stood there, her face guilt-ridden, not daring to mention calling the police again. The village chief, realizing what was happening, shook his head. It's clear now. She was trying to hurt others, but only ended up causing trouble for her own daughter. What a pity. Turning to me, he said with a sigh, May, I'll do my best to help you, but I'm getting too old to keep handling these problems. I frowned, speaking in a calm voice. This concerns the letter of annulment for the engagement. Weston responded a few days ago, saying he couldn't write the letter and that I should be the one to do it. But I can't. Since Weston is the one who wanted the annulment, it must be him who writes it. If he refuses to write it— I paused, looking at Indy's mother. Then, at worst, I'll go there myself and make him write it. But the travel expenses will be covered by Indy's family, since they're the ones causing this. I wonder what punishment Weston will face then. Before I could finish, shouting erupted outside. A group of people ran into the yard, yelling, "Oh no, oh no! Indy jumped into the river to commit suicide." Indy's mother went pale, broke free from the people holding her, and rushed home. The yard cleared out, and I didn't believe Indy truly wanted to die. Maybe it was just a desperate impulse or an excuse to get attention. Word of Indy's jump spread in the afternoon, with rumors saying that someone had agreed to marry her, but there would be no betrothal gifts. Instead, Indy's family would need to provide a bicycle as a dowry. Indy's mother was furious, but she had no choice but to agree, or else her daughter might truly die. The wedding preparations began slowly, with no real joy in the air and only a small guest list. 2 days later, I heard that Indy's mother had fallen ill, suffering a stroke. The letter of annulment was delivered by Indy herself. When she entered, her hand was covering her flat stomach in what should have been a delicate gesture, but her eyes burned with venom. "May, are you happy now? Look at my miserable situation. Are you satisfied?" I stood up and walked towards her, my tone cold, as I replied, "Is my misery caused by me? If you and your mother hadn't schemed against me first, I wouldn't have fallen into this trap. Indy, you're a junior high student. At least you should understand that those who commit unjust deeds will inevitably bring disaster upon themselves. Anything else? If not, just leave. We're not friends, and we don't have casual conversations anymore." I turned to leave, but suddenly Indy dropped to her knees in front of me. "What are you doing?" I quickly bent down to help her up, realizing that she was probably in the early stages of pregnancy, which is the most unstable time. I didn't want anything bad to happen to her under my roof. "May, for the sake of our years of friendship, I beg you for one last thing," Indy said, through gritted teeth, clutching my leg. "I want Weston to fall into ruin and never rise again. If he's heartless, I won't hesitate to be ruthless. He owes me this." Her voice grew louder as she became frantic. "This is what he owes me." "Indy, calm down," I said, my frown deepening as I looked at her frantic state. I pulled her over to a stool. Why do you want me to do this? Aren't you two siblings? Indy, her voice crazed, shot back. He's not my brother. He's the reason I ended up like this. At that moment, as if a switch had flipped, she looked at me with a smug expression. You don't know, do you? Everything my mother and I did was hinted at by my brother in his letters. Ha, May, does it hurt? You still like him, don't you? I'll tell you, he never liked you. He's just been using you. Once you're of no use, he'll toss you aside. I remained calm, saying, I already know. After all, neither you nor your mother are particularly clever. Weston's the only one with any brains in your family. Indy clicked her tongue in annoyance. I continued, As for any heartache, I don't feel any pain. After all, you and your family are strangers to me now. Indy stood up and walked towards the door. As she reached it, she suddenly turned around and said, Do you know why my mother got sick so suddenly? Weston also sent a letter to our home. In it, he said he was punished by the army for writing the annulment letter. He was supposed to be demoted to a regular soldier, but someone pleaded for him, and he managed to stay. Still lying in bed, unable to move, I thought to myself, May, I know you have the power to bring Weston down. Call me cruel or call me heartless, but he only wrote a few words in that letter, and look where it's led me. I won't rest until I take something precious from him, even if it means dying in the process. Indy's harsh words seemed to echo in the room, and ironically, I wasn't at peace either. Soon the day of the college entrance exams arrived, and Grandma was busy every moment, especially ensuring I ate well to avoid any issues. She worried so much about me. After the exams, I finally let my tense nerves relax, so I decided to head to the city on my own to give Weston a big surprise. I waited for 3 days outside the military family compound, watching closely. Eventually, I spotted Weston. He looked at me in disbelief, clearly not understanding why I was there. I grabbed him and pulled him aside, pulled out the letters I had bundled up, and got straight to the point. Give me 1,000 yuan, or I'll show these letters to your girlfriend. The letters were personal ones Weston had sent me over the years. While the content was generally proper, there was a certain affection in them that his girlfriend would surely disapprove of. Weston spoke in a harsh tone. May, do you really think I'll be coerced by you? Something unexpected could happen to a woman in an unfamiliar place. I felt a bit sorry for him, but silently said nothing. I pointed at the security guard and spoke calmly. See him? I told the old man that I'm here for my unfaithful fiancé. I'll come to find him every day for the next half-month. If I don't show up, something will have happened to me. I asked him to look for a man named Weston and report him for abandoning his wife. Weston's face turned pale, clearly surprised by my thorough plan. He stammered, You're asking for too much. 500 at most. I sneered. He still thought I was the timid May from before. I stood on tiptoe and straightened Weston's collar, then slowly replied, "Not a penny less. I'll return in 3 days. Don't try anything funny. I already know the way to Captain Sue's house." 3 days later, Weston showed up with the money as promised. There wasn't much cash, and it seemed he had borrowed from several people. He also handed me an agreement, which I glanced at quickly. It basically stated that I couldn't disturb his life or threaten him anymore. After signing, I remembered something and spoke sarcastically. "Weston, did you know your dear mother had a stroke, and Indy's already married? She's pregnant and married a scoundrel." Weston stiffened and looked at me, his eyes filled with venom. "May, you're truly heartless. Indy is the sister you grew up with. How could you do this to her?" "Why couldn't I do it?" I replied coldly. "You were the ones scheming against me first. I'm just retaliating normally." I looked at Weston's face, filled with hatred, resentment, and a trace of fear, and said calmly, "Don't think too highly of yourself. To me, you're just trash. Do you understand?" I threw the signed agreement in his face and turned to leave. I had been out for a long time, and it was time to head home before Grandma started worrying. On my way out, I ran into Mia's father. He was a true captain, righteous and with a determined look. After I showed him the letter of annulment and explained that Weston had abandoned his sick mother and mistreated me in his quest for a higher status, I was confident that Mia's father would help me get justice. At Gexex University, my roommate Lillian hugged my arm playfully and pouted in a childish tone. "Sister May, I want to go to your house today and eat Grandma's braised pork ribs and crispy fried fish." I smiled at her, amused. "Stop with the fake voice and talk normally." Lillian stuck her tongue out and grabbed her bag, pulling me along. After dinner, I helped Grandma lie down, and she took my hand, a content smile on her face. "This life, it's beyond anything I ever imagined," she said, smiling peacefully. "Yes, Grandma, there's never been a life like this before." A few days after I returned from the city, I received the admission notice, and the entire village was in an uproar. No one expected a college student to come out of our small mountain village. The village chief held my hand, tears in his eyes, and praised me, saying how proud he was. Before I left, I thanked everyone for looking after me all these years, and I held a banquet to both celebrate and say goodbye. After Grandma fell asleep, I went back to my room and took out a letter from the village chief. It said that Weston had been discharged from the army for some reason and had returned home. On his first day back, he went to Indy's new in-laws to try and take her back. But a fight broke out, and Weston ended up with a serious injury to his head. Indy, terrified, miscarried, and was in the hospital fighting for her life. Indy's mother died from shock, unable to close her eyes. Reading the letter, the corners of my mouth curled into a smile. What a fitting end for the wicked, I thought. It was worth living this life again. This time, I would truly live for myself.